America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live from the West Coast today, outside of the Beltway, gathering intel wherever I go from ordinary Americans of all walks of life so that I do not have Beltway blue bubble disease, which unfortunately many people have. I was on Fox News Special Report last night, and if anyone missed that, stick around. At the bottom of the hour, I'm going to replay Bret Baier's special report into the early documents released that they gained via FOIA at Fox News that reveal an astonishing decision by Dr. Collins at the National Institute of Health and Tony Fauci to basically decide that the Wuhan lab release could not be true. They constructed a narrative around it not being true, and they declined to entertain any dissenting view that it wasn't true. And at one point, Dr. Collins actually said in an email, he's been a guest on this show 4 times, and I admire him quite a lot. But, well, let's go to what I had to say on Special Report last night. It was cut number 23 after the report played. It's a 11-minute report, which I will play for you at the bottom of the hour. Here was my reaction, cut number 23.
Hugh, I mean, obviously there's a U.S. component here, and what we were funding and doing in the Wuhan virology that lab that we really don't have all the answers to yet either.
We're not close. That was a devastating report, Brett. The CDC and the NIH obviously decided on judgment before verdict. They had their conclusion that it wasn't coming out of the lab. They had their narrative that they'd looked at it very carefully, and they had their motive. Dr. Collins' email that you disclosed in the special report that in the interest of science and international harmony, basically we have to stop this story. The next question is, what did they tell the White House? President Trump was taking all the arrows on their behalf. He defended the CDC when they botched the testing. He defended the CDC at every turn. But now we have a record that you've exposed tonight, and we'll see what people say tomorrow, of a cover-up that is at least as damning as any I've heard of in the last few years. It was pretty remarkable. I meant to say verdict before trial, because that's what it was. They just decided, we can't do Wuhan lab, can't be that. And Dr. Collins sends an email saying, in the interest of science and international harmony. I wasn't aware he had the Division of International Harmony. I want that job in the next Republican administration. I'm not sure I'll get the Division of International Harmony. We'll find out. More on that coming up. Omicron took 2,362 lives yesterday. 652,000 cases is the average number of cases a day. It's still with us. It's everywhere. It's just not going to kill you if you're vaccinated and you have a booster. The Omicron is a wake-up call about the need to vaccinate the world, say Hill Democrats and experts. No, it's not. It's a wake-up call to the United States to know what it's doing when it comes time for the next pandemic and to know when to end it, which is now. COVID-19, according to the Wall Street Journal, fuels best ever commercial real estate sales. So it's not just your houses that have gone up in value, it's commercial buildings. Biotech Pfizer are starting a clinical trial on an all-purpose Omicron vaccine, not a third or fourth dose of the Pfizer vaccine that already exists. Spotify is in the middle of a tug-of-war between Joe Rogan and his podcast. Apparently he has on some vax-skeptical people occasionally. I don't listen to Joe, but some people have been on who've upset Neil Young, who threatens to pull his songs from Spotify. Joe Rogan's going to win that one, Neil. Sorry. The U.S. and the EU. Now let's turn to the big news. The U.S. and the EU are close to agreeing on Russian financial sanctions. That's not enough. Emmanuel Macron calls for de-escalation of tensions as he prepares to speak to Vladimir Putin. That's not enough. That's from the Telegraph and the New York Times. Where is Germany in the Ukraine standoff? Its allies wonder. The United States and its NATO allies are moving to bulk up their military commitments in the Baltics and Eastern Europe as the standoff with Russia over Ukraine deepens, writes Katrin Benenhold. Denmark is sending fighter jets to Lithuania, a frigate to the Baltic Sea. France has offered to send troops to Romania. Spain is sending a frigate to the Black Sea. President Biden has pulled thousands of U.S. troops on high alert. And then there's Germany. In recent days, Germany, Europe's largest, richest democracy, strategically situated at the crossroads between East and West, has stood out more for what it will not do than what it is doing. Germany is out. They've just left NATO behind. If plans, according to the Wall Street Journal now, U.S. plans sanctions export controls against Russia if it invades Ukraine. It's not working. The U.S. says it will bolster Europe's fuel supply if Putin cuts them off from the natural gas to which they become addicted. It's not working. At the end of special report yesterday, I made my comments to Brett about the crisis over Ukraine. Can we play cut number 24?
Hugh, interesting Financial Times piece today. Russia and China's plans for a new world order. Says when Vladimir Putin travels to Beijing for the beginning of the Winter Olympics on February 4th, the Russian president will meet with the leader who has become his most important ally, Xi Jinping of China. In a phone call between Putin and Xi in December, the Chinese leader supported Russia's demand that Ukraine must never join NATO. Both Putin and Xi believe that their vulnerability to color revolutions stems from fundamental flaws in the current world order. As a result, they share a determination to create a new world order that will better accommodate the interests of Russia and China as defined by their current leaders. I found that piece fascinating. Your thoughts?
It was a fascinating piece. China has flipped the America card and the Russia card and shuffled the deck. So now it's Russia and China against the United States in a fraying NATO. Look, President Biden got in and he immediately gave them the short-range missile treaty that Putin wanted. He followed that up, as Tom Cotton likes to point out, by giving them Nord Stream. Then Putin, the malign but very rational and cold-eyed KGB agent, watches Afghanistan collapse, and he has concluded he can move. The only thing that matters to me, Brett, right now, is what's in our lethal aid package. Not the 8,500 soldiers who've mobilized, pray for them and their families, but what did we send them? Did we send them land-to-sea missiles to threaten the Russian Navy? Did we send them surface-to-air missiles to threaten Russian fighters? I know they need anti-tank missiles. We did apparently send them. What matters now is what we give Ukraine to defend themselves and nothing else. And we haven't given them enough, and we haven't given it fast enough.
That's just my bottom line. The only thing that matters, the only metric with Biden is what are we giving the Ukrainians to shoot Russians with? Because that may deter Putin, especially land-to-sea missiles. Especially land-to-sea missiles. There's other news this morning. The Secretary of Commerce warned yesterday that we have a 5-day supply of computer chips in the United States. Good going, Joe Biden, after a year. Microsoft reported great earnings. Now, let me do a Birch Gold ad here. Let me do a market update. Because yesterday was another wild day on the market. The Dow ended up 66, the S&P was down 53, and NASDAQ went down 353. Then Microsoft came in and blew away earnings. Analysts were expecting $50.7 billion in revenue and $17.5 billion in net income, and they turned in $51.7 and $18.8 billion. So Microsoft is going to already up and will continue to rise throughout the day. That should buoy the rest of the tech that had been upset by Netflix being, well, you can only sell so many subscriptions to Netflix. People like Microsoft and Amazon are making money on the wave. Gold, however, this is brought to you by Birch Gold in the first hour. If you need gold, you go to hughgold.com or you text my name, Hugh, to 989898. Gold popped up to $1,847.30. $1,847.30. I've been talking to you about gold since it was at $1,400. I think you need to have 5 to 10% of your retirement account either in actual physical metal gold inside of your safety deposit box or roll over a portion of your existing 401 or SEP IRA into a IRS-approved, Birch Gold administrated retirement account. And how do you find out about that? You go to hughgold.com and request the free information kit, or you text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 989898. And I do that given where inflation is going. The 10 years at 1.783% as well. Overseas this morning, everything is green. Germany up 2.21%. France at the same level. England's up almost 2%, even though it's question day. Maybe that's why they're up 2%. They love question day with the prime minister. We'll keep our eye on that when it opens up in about 45 minutes. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm live from the West Coast. It's Wednesday, and I'm Hugh Hewitt. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live from the West Coast this morning. As I've told you in recent weeks, I've got a group of retired military captains, colonels, and general officers who keep me focused on private and public intel. They just wrote that imagery out of Russia shows the Russians moving pontoon bridges on rails through Belarus. That's serious. We haven't seen this. moved during exercises before. Still no field hospitals, but also reports that 3 Russian amphibious ships passed Gibraltar last night. I'm joined by the New York Times' Peter Baker, who's been covering the Russia-Ukraine crisis closely from a unique perspective of having authored, along with Susan Glasser, a great book on James Baker, the Secretary of State at the time of the dissolution of the Soviet Union into Russia and its constituent parts. Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Hey, good morning. How are you? You're up early.
I'm always up early when I'm out on the West Coast, but the payoff is the day ahead, not the night behind. Peter, have you talked with former Secretary of State Baker about the Ukraine crisis at all?
No, it's a good question. I haven't lately, and I would love to hear what he has to say. Obviously, I'm sure he's watching this with great interest. He would be, he would be believing aggressive diplomacy, backed by strength of deterrence and other moves. Some of this, which we sometimes have taken, others I'm sure he would find of his own. But it's a big crisis, and you want to have your, you would want to have your best diplomatic chops in there at the moment you're facing it.
This is one of the Fabergé egg crises. The crisis at the bottom, at the last egg, is Ukraine-Russia. But on top of that is Russia-NATO, and on top of that is the dissolution of NATO, Peter. I think we see Germany, some senator called it their de facto exit. Might have been Cotton. I'm not sure who called it a de facto exit on the show this week. What do you make of Germany's decision to basically say, not us, not our problem, we need the gas?
Well, this is what Putin wants right now. What Putin wants is to drive a wedge between us and NATO. He had some help under the last administration because we had a president who was pretty anti-NATO. But NATO has its own problems, even under this president or any other president, because it doesn't agree on these kinds of issues. And Putin has picked a particularly tense moment to do it. We have new leadership in Germany. Angela Merkel is gone now. Stolz is in. We've got Macron facing an election. We've got Johnson in trouble in London. We've got disagreements in NATO over what to do about Hungary and Poland. And so he's picked this moment when there's a lot of fraught possibility of splitting up NATO, and that's what he wants to do. So that's why. Here's the thing, though, Hugh. To the extent that his goal is to get NATO out of his backyard, he's accomplished the exact opposite. Because right now he's given NATO a little bit more reason for living that it used to have, right? There's a lot of years we talked about what was the purpose of NATO if Russia was no longer a threat. Well, guess what? Russia looks like a threat now, and NATO's purpose seems to be revived. And we now have troops and planes and ships heading toward, or at least alerted for, Eastern Europe. So, but Putin has accomplished in some ways the exact opposite of what he says he wants.
Well, if you consider that Germany's out, but the Baltic states and Poland are in, that's an interesting trade. Peter, I got to go back. You mentioned Trump, so I will respond that Putin invaded Ukraine under Obama, and he's about to invade Ukraine under Biden. He didn't invade Ukraine under Trump, and I think that goes to the essence of deterrence. I've seen Secretary Pompeo and Senator Cotton on. Senator Cotton was on this show. Mike Pompeo was on last week. They preach weakness is provocative, and this appears to be the result of President Biden quickly signing the short-range missile treaty, which Putin wanted, quickly okaying the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which Putin wanted, and not actually setting any signals about Ukraine until this week. I think we started to send lethal aid this week. Is it your understanding, by the way, that land-to-sea missiles are included in the lethal aid?
I don't know exactly. I don't remember exactly what's in that 200,000 pounds of aid. I think they've been sending aid all year, by the way. A lot of it's landed in the last week, and they've made a point of showing the pictures of it. I mean, to your point, I understand what your point is, and I think that's a fair question: is have we shown weakness, or have we shown the proper degree of strength for deterrence? That's a debate to be had out there, absolutely. And you're right that Russia didn't invade Ukraine during Trump, but on the other hand, Trump didn't do anything to get Crimea back, or didn't do anything to forestall Russia from doing anything either. I think there was a disparity in the last administration between the president, who was very friendly with Putin and unwilling to challenge him, and folks like Mike Pompeo and others in his administration who were more willing to challenge Russia, who wanted to do more, and in fact approved in some cases some aggressive policies. And it was always kind of this mixed message that
well, there's one message. There was one message that wasn't mixed. When the little green men, who were Russians, came over the hill in Syria, American combat forces killed every one of them. And I believe it was 900 Russian irregulars tried to attack American forces in Syria, and Trump's rules of engagement were quite clear, and they were mowed down, and they didn't try that again. And at the same time, Trump was, Rick Grinnell is the fiercest advocate of this, obliging NATO to get to their 2%. That's gone now with the Germans. I know that President Biden campaigned on repairing NATO, but are you going to believe what he says or our own lying eyes? NATO's fallen apart, and he's the president.
Yeah, no, he is, and he's the one right now who is facing this crisis regardless of what previous presidents have done. And I think that for Biden, there has been, this is not what they wanted. What they came into office thinking was they could mow the lawn with Russia in effect. They could, from time to time, pay a little bit of attention, but they wanted to focus on China. They didn't want Russia to be the main actor. And Putin wants to be the main actor. He wants people to be paying attention to him. He wants to force his way onto the world stage. He wants to be treated like a great power, and he won't take being ignored as a policy. And I think that we're being tested now. Biden is being tested now, and this is going to be a big moment. People talk a lot about what's happened under the first year of Biden and whether the second year is going to be any good or not. The truth is, if there is a land war in Europe, everything changes. This is a huge deal. Hopefully that's not what's going to happen, but we don't know right now. As you say, there's a lot of disturbing signs in terms of the imagery and other things. So this is a big, big moment for President Biden. He's going to have to figure out how to handle it.
And if it's another Afghanistan, I don't know how you go below 33% in the Quinnipiac poll, but it's possible. Peter Baker, in terms of what the president should get from Congress, should he go up and ask for a resolution endorsing the 1994 agreement? You wrote a background piece, which I just tweeted out to everyone. Putin's claim that we promised not to expand NATO into Ukraine is false, and you proved that. Putin claims a lot about 1994 and about 1989 and 90 that is simply a lie, and your piece in early January is crucial. I don't know if it's behind the paywall or not, but as Brett Baer pointed out in a special report last night, since that time, China and Russia have played the China card against us. It's now China and Russia against the United States, not in the era of Nixon when he got China to be on our side. I don't know that many people are following this from the geopolitical perspective.
Yeah, it's a big moment in the geopolitical perspective, and there's there's been signs of Russia and China coming together. Although I have to say, having spent 4 years in Russia as a correspondent there 20 years ago at the beginning of Putin, this is something we talked about for a long time, something we've always feared. It never actually happens, at least not on the scale that we think it will, because the Russians and Chinese actually have quite a lot of differences of their own. So it's easy to get overtaken by that, but you don't want to be obviously at odds with both Russia and China at the same time if you can help it. I don't know that you can. What some advocates have suggested is that we should be more deferential to Russia because China is the bigger threat. That seems to be a bipartisan rejection of that for the most part by most Republicans and Democrats, because Russia has made it clear that it is a threat in a way that China might not be the same kind of threat, but it's an important one. You can't simply allow it to happen. The Bucharest Memorandum that you're referring to in 1994 guaranteed Ukraine's sovereignty, guaranteed its independence, signed by the new Russia as an exchange for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons. And guess what? When Russia says we violated some agreement we didn't make about not expanding NATO, he has violated the agreement they did make. They actually put pen to paper on an agreement in which they said they would guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty. Obviously, they violated that 8 years ago when they took Crimea and fostered this war in the east. They would violate it even more if they pursue it in the days to come.
Last question, Peter. The Winter War is when Russia invaded Finland, and they found out that the Finns were not for giving up their country. Do you expect that Ukraine will in any way deter a Russian invasion if it comes? Do they have the capacity to stop Putin in his tracks?
Well, this is one of the things I don't understand about what Putin is doing here, because the truth is, totally aside from what the United States or the West might do, totally aside from any consequences that would happen as a result of from the West, there's a lot of reason to think this is a bad idea for him. Because, yes, the Russian military is stronger than the Ukrainian military. Presumably they could win a conventional war, maybe even easily. But the Ukrainians aren't going to sit down and then say, okay, it's all over. There could be a partisan war, a guerrilla war. They've learned what happened to us in Iraq and Afghanistan. It could be very, very bloody and bad for Putin.
Peter, you can't write that story often enough. Peter Baker from the New York Times. Follow him at Peter Baker NYT on Twitter. Thank you. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. Chopin's Funeral March. As I bring in Congressman Mike Gallagher, who's very sad, as our most Packer fan. Robbie Gould is a name that will live in infamy in Green Bay. Hello, Congressman. How are you?
I would say that music does adequately capture my mood right now. So that's very well done, Hugh. I will say I attribute this loss to many things, but foremost among them may be that you cursed my lucky Packer vest when you wore it, and so I didn't realize at the time you were rope-a-doping me into a Packer loss by losing that bet. So my hat's off to
you. Congressman, I think every ethicist in the universe would have advised you not to claim a win of the Packers over the Browns on that missed INT that we all saw. And so when Robbie Gould lined up, I knew it was over because you can't get somewhere on an illegal, you're a lawyer. No, you're not a lawyer. You don't understand that fraud is everything. And when there's fraud in the Packers getting to that game, there's going to be a comeuppance. Everything in football is juju. You know that.
Well, Hugh, I prefer not to dwell on the past. I'm now looking forward to the future of Aaron Rodgers coming back, us reassembling.
He's not coming back. Congressman, you're a smart. He's not getting. He's going to be. He scares me. He's going to be in Pittsburgh next year or in Denver. Either way, the Browns have to play him again with a real team.
Well, I was having a debate with Dwayne about whether it's worse to be a Packers fan or a Bills fan right now. That was a heartbreaking loss. But at least the Bills.
No, it's worse to be a Packers fan. I mean, you've done this 2 years in a row.
It's too soon. It's too soon.
No, I mean, you asked a question, and the Bills fans haven't done this 2 years in a row. When they lost 4 Super Bowls in a row, that was pretty bad, or 4 Super Bowls in the space of 5 years, I guess. But, I mean, to lose 2 divisional games at the very last play, I mean, they didn't go for it last year, and they had nothing to do with it this year. Is there any commentary you'd like to offer Packers Nation, OU, who triumphed over the illegitimate win over the Browns?
Well, I just would say this is a lesson that apparently special teams matters, and you can't completely neglect special teams. Otherwise, it comes back to bite you in the playoffs. Much like the Biden administration neglecting key parts of the geopolitical environment.
Good transition. Good transition.
Collapsing.
What did we send to Ukraine? Did we send them land-to-sea missiles? Because I saw from a private chat room that they've got Russian ships going past Gibraltar towards the landing zones in Ukraine.
We sent them Javelin anti-tank missiles. We sent them other anti-armor systems, grenade launchers, munitions, non-lethal equipment essential to Ukraine's military. However, in their arsenal right now, they have something called the Neptune anti-ship missile, which is capable of striking targets at a distance of up to 300 kilometers. So that's more than adequate if you're striking targets in the Black Sea right now. So depending on how good they are at operating the system, how many missiles they have, cruise missiles they have in their arsenal, they should be able to at least hold Russian ships at threat at a distance, and therefore we wouldn't need to deploy our similar systems with a longer range like the Nemesis missile right now. So that being said, I'm sure there's expertise that we could offer them on that. I guess the bigger question when it comes to naval assets in the Black Sea is whether we need to deploy naval assets to the Black Sea. It gets very complicated right now. We have exercises going on in the Eastern Med. We have the USS Harry Truman. That's really not designed to affect anything on the ground in Ukraine so much as just kind of send a message to Russia in other parts of the region. Our good friend Jerry Hendricks has argued in the past that we have to be able to move, for example, littoral combat ships into the Black Sea. You could have a squadron of 4 LCS-1s. The LCS-2 is shallow enough in its draft to be able to enter the Sea of Azov. However, that would mean we'd violate something called the Montreux Convention. But given that Russia is already in violation of it, we shouldn't necessarily be too concerned about that. So right now we don't have our own naval assets in the Black Sea, and I think that's something we need to look at right now. We need to look at everything we can do to bolster our deterrent capability vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, because the Biden administration is simply moving too slow, and the more it delays and the more it sends mixed signals, the less options we have in our arsenal right now. And the fact that we're sending the signal that we're going to evacuate another embassy I think is terrible. I mean, and it raises the question, how many embassies do we need to evacuate before the Biden administration realizes that its foreign policy isn't working, right? I mean, this is the same team that bungled the evacuation of the Afghanistan embassy is now going to get a chance to do it again in Ukraine. It's absolutely embarrassing.
Congressman, you've got the PhD in history, and you have been in Congress on armed services for a number of years now. I understand that mobilizing 8,500 American troops, including the 82nd Airborne, is a domestic consumption thing, which is going to greatly be a burden on the military families who see their loved ones go off to Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. But it's got nothing to do with Ukraine. We are not going to commit troops there. The only thing that matters, and correct me if I'm wrong, is what the president says he will do, absolutely, if they invade, and what we give them right now. So all I care about is what are we giving them right now? Do you have visibility into that as a member of the House Armed Services Committee?
Well, and what we're giving them is not enough, and it's not quickly enough. You know, I'm glad that they're getting javelins. They want ammo and intel right now. They want javelins, they want stingers, and they want intel that they can use for actionable targets, which means that we will need to enhance our cooperation on the ground. But you're absolutely right. The 8,500 troops that the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby talked about, well, one, they haven't actually been sent anywhere, and two, they're not going to be on the ground in Ukraine. So I sort of read that as the Biden administration's tacit admission that they're not interested in fighting Russia over Ukraine. At best, they're just going to do whatever is necessary to save face by bolstering the surrounding countries. And we find ourselves in a position where the Biden administration has been unable to persuade key NATO allies, foremost among them Germany, to go along with a united response. And if you remember, part of the Biden administration, or Biden's argument on the campaign trail against then President Donald Trump, was effectively that he was too mean to the Europeans and that Biden was going to restore unity among our NATO allies and our European allies. Well, precisely the opposite. Biden has further fractured NATO, and you have some states like the UK being very forward-leaning, very aggressive, and dismayed that the U.S. has been caught flat-footed yet again. You have other countries like Estonia who want to provide more weapons to Ukraine, but are being blocked by countries like Germany.
Germany has de facto left. Germany has de facto left NATO. People need to realize they are not our friends. Last night I was on Special Report, along with your future colleague in the House, Morgan Ortagus, I might add, who is running for Tennessee's 5th Congressional District. I got asked by Brett Baer about what's going on in Ukraine. Here's my response. I want your comment on it. Cut number 24.
Hugh, interesting Financial Times piece today. Russia and China's plans for a new world order. It says when Vladimir Putin travels to Beijing for the beginning of the Winter Olympics on February 4th, the Russian president will meet with the leader who has become his most important ally, Xi Jinping of China. In a phone call between Putin and Xi in December, the Chinese leader supported Russia's demand that Ukraine must never join NATO. Both Putin and Xi believe that their vulnerability to color revolutions stems from fundamental flaws in the current world order. As a result, they share a determination to create a new world order that will better accommodate the interests of Russia and China as defined by their current leaders. Found that piece fascinating. Your thoughts?
It was a fascinating piece. China has flipped the America card and the Russia card and shuffled the decks. And now it's Russia and China against the United States in a fraying NATO. Look, President Biden got in and he immediately gave them the short-range missile treaty that Putin wanted. He followed that up, as Tom Cotton likes to point out, by giving them Nord Stream. Then Putin, the malign but very rational and cold-eyed KGB agent, watches Afghanistan collapse, and he has concluded he can move. The only thing that matters
After the events, the short-range missile treaty, Nord Stream 2, Afghan collapse. If you're Vladimir Putin, what do you conclude, Mike Gallagher?
That I have an open door to do what I want, and I will not be met with any response from the West, or at best, I'll be met with some feckless sanctions after I've already achieved my objective. And in that clip, you're touching on something very important, Hugh, because I think there's an argument on the left and the right now that because China is our biggest threat over the long term, and I agree that it is, we somehow need to pursue a reverse Nixon when it comes to peeling Russia away and working with us against China. That would indeed be a geopolitical masterstroke if it was possible. However, it's just not possible right now. And if you play out the realpolitik in Ukraine, it's not as if Putin's asking us to recognize Crimea, and in return, he'll work with us on preventing a PLA invasion of Taiwan. That's not on the table. I think this is almost a weird version of the same fallacy that you saw with Obama-Biden in their Iran policy, where they said, if only we could just negotiate a grand bargain with Iran, we could win them over as an ally in the region. That failed. A Russian gambit would fail similarly, as the failed resets during Bush 43, Obama, and Trump all demonstrated. And it sort of breaks the cardinal rule of international relations, which is treat your friends as your friends and your adversaries as your adversaries. We can't sort of mirror image a different regime onto the Kremlin, as much as that would be nice and would help us vis-a-vis China. They're cooperating more closely right now. Putin has demonstrated which side he's on, and he's not on our side.
There's a new entente, China, Russia, Iran, against which we have to ally a new entente of Japan, Australia, India, the United States, and other free countries with a possible quiet membership of Vietnam. And in Europe, we just have to consider Germany out of the game. I just think Germany doesn't deserve our, we shouldn't give them intel. I don't think that, this is the last minute, Mike Gallagher, I don't think Germany's in NATO anymore.
Well, I think over the long term, it would be better if they're in NATO, in our side. Obviously, the German political environment, much like our own, has a lot of different factions. Right now, the party in charge obviously is going in a direction that we don't like. But Hugh, I can't help but think, had the Biden administration not preemptively surrendered economically by allowing Nord Stream 2 to go forward, I think the Germans would be in a different position today. I think if you gave them the choice between being on our side and being on the side of the Russians, and if you weren't waging a war against American domestic energy production, such that over the long term we're not going to be in a better position to supply more LNG to Europe, I think we'd be in a different position. Obviously, I can't prove that counterfactual, but I think Biden's bad energy policies and economic policies has actually made the German position worse.
100%. So, Congressman, when we talk next week, I hope you'll consider the Green Bay curse is not going to go away until you renounce the alleged W of Green Bay over Cleveland at the Christmas catastrophe, we call it in the NFL, and it brought down a curse on the Packers that will be long, long lived. Congressman Gallagher, my condolences. Talk to you next week. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Brian Wesbury, Chief Economist for First Trust Portfolio. You see Brian everywhere. I love having Brian on once a week to assess what's going on. Good morning, Brian. How are you?
Hugh, I am really, really well.
I got to begin.
Bunch of great football games over the weekend.
Oh, weren't they?
Unreal.
They were terrific.
Unreal.
I just had on a very sad Congressman Gallagher from Green Bay, so they're in mourning, but the rest of us can enjoy football. Let's talk a little bit.
They should be happy that the NFL is alive and well.
Very.
How many people were telling us it was done and over?
Have you noticed that politics kind of got out of the NFL this year? That maybe the owners and the players figured out this is a golden goose. We don't want to slit its throat. So Brian, I got to get to Bitcoin. I began the show by saying, don't buy what you don't understand. And Dwayne and I went over this. If you can't explain to me what Bitcoin is and Ethereum and how blockchain operates and what the wallet does, then you're just gambling. And if it's gambling money, that's fine if you can afford to lose it. But what do you think about Bitcoin and how low do you think it goes?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's blockchain, which is the underlying mechanics of all this, and that's going to be with us forever. It's going to change the way we transfer information on the internet. This other idea that a Bitcoin you're going to be able to force the government to let it replace its currency, it's a pipe dream. You know, Hugh, if we only had 21 million Bitcoin, because that's all you can make, or let's just change it, $21 million, and you couldn't make any more, I would love that monetary policy. because it's the closest thing we have to the gold standard.
Right.
And the reason the gold standard is so good is because it's what we call hard money. You couldn't do QE like we did last year. If you went and borrowed $5 trillion, you couldn't sell 3.5 of it to the Fed. You'd have to sell the whole thing to the public, and you'd face the consequences. And so this is why the government will never let it become our true money.
And so on that point, Brian, when someone's listening and they're driving around and they own Bitcoin or they're thinking about it, my number one advice to them is don't buy it. But my second piece of advice, I don't know when to sell it because I'm not a prophet nor the son of a prophet. What do you advise clients about unloading their Bitcoin?
Well, I'm going to be right there with you, Hugh. You're as close to a prophet as I know, and that is, look, it's probably going to go higher. There's too many people that know about it, too many people that want it, too many think that they're really going to stick their finger in the eye of the man if they buy it, and so they'll probably go higher. I don't think it'll ever, if you take all the GDP, all of our production in America and divide it by 21 million, it says each Bitcoin would be worth $1 million.
Yep.
Well, so technically that's its peak, but it'll never get there, in my opinion. But will it get to 100, 150 before, so maybe there's probably some trades to be had. Clearly the thing's volatile.
But Brian, isn't it the tulip from the beginning of time? You financial monetarists have understood there are bubbles. The tulip bulb bubble right through the 2008 housing bubble on cheap money and everybody qualifies. The Bitcoin bubble.
Tulip, you got something that was pretty.
That's what I mean. Buy stocks and bonds like Microsoft, right? They had a good year. I mean, the underlying economy is fine. It's just the money supply and the absurd theatrics going on. I want to give you the last minute to just calm people down. There's no market crash. There's nothing like that, but there is risk.
Oh, yeah. In Bitcoin, in all these cryptocurrencies, there's massive risk. Where there is less risk is in the the blockchain, the technology that's underneath of it. It's going to change how we transfer information on the internet for the rest of our lives, and so you got to try to separate the two because there's companies that do both things.
Yeah, and we ought to find out who the Google of blockchain is and buy that, or the Amazon of blockchain. But I don't know what that is, and frankly, I'm not at the investing age. I'm at the investing age where you want growth and income, not where you want speculation, right? So I want to encourage everyone under the age of 60, don't get smart about Bitcoin. Brian, last word. What do you think of my advice?
Yeah, don't get smart about Bitcoin, but represent what it represents, which is fear of inflation.
Buy
commodities, buy materials, buy industrials. Those are the things that are going to win.
That is always, as always, Wesbury is on point. Follow him on Twitter at Wesbury.